Hey, Mark, you can go ahead and jump on now. Yeah. Okay. All right. Hey, Mark, I'm just waiting on Doc to come in.
Hey, all right.
Yeah, I'm just waiting on Doc to.
Okay.
Um, he thought it was at a different time. I'm pretty sure I told him 4 o'clock, but
Oh, okay.
yeah.
No problem.
So what have you been up to?
Right. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, he's pretty knowledgeable.
Right.
Hello.
I listened to that first one y'all did. It was good.
Okay, well you'll like this one.
All right.
All right, well, we're back with Messy Progress Part 3. It seems like I always want to have these conversations with Dr. Watson after somebody pisses me off or I see something
Well,
stupid.
you got to
or I
stop
hear
being
something
pissed
stupid.
off, Roger.
And then I always get with Doc because Doc's he's one of America's gifts, unknown gifts, and he has a lot to offer. He will be down with. He's got another presentation on September 24th at the University of Houston, discussing more knowledge, giving more knowledge again on policing in Houston this time. But today, what I want to discuss is the narrative of whiteness. And I want Doc to talk about whiteness, what that means when people say whiteness, and then there's another question I want Doc to answer is this thing about calling Black people racist because they have a different viewpoint than white folks, some white folks, as I've been told. To me, I see that in my point of view, as long as you are going towards their narrative of equality and equity, you're okay. But as soon as you go past that and you challenge that narrative that they want to hear, now you're a racist. So I want Doc to talk about whiteness and what whiteness means, and about this ploy or tactic that I see many white people use as when they call those who don't agree with them racist. Doc, it's on you.
Well, my first question, Roger, is how you doing, bro? You got that afro working?
Yeah, man, this is my COVID hairstyle, man. You know, I ain't had a haircut. I'm going back to the 70s.
Well, I don't actually need a haircut, but I want to get one to make me feel like I did something. Okay. I think the question of race and American history has to be a discussion that people fail to have. We don't talk about the origins of race or racism in American history. We don't talk about the kind of constructs of racism that emerged in the 1830s, 1840s, moving up, and how periodically it manifests itself in different variations. The latest, the one that most people kind of get their ideas of race from, kind of emerged in the 1880s and 90s with the emergence of Jim Crow. But the scientific notions of race and racism had their own iterations. 1840s, it came out of Europe to the United States. But there was always this concept of race and inferior status being attached to minorities in the country, whether they be Native American, whether they be Mexican people, or if they were Africans who had been held in bondage. There seemed to be this racial hierarchy that whites were promulgating, that in this so-called organic society that we lived in, that that the people who owned the land and worked the land and controlled the labor, no matter what kind of labor it was, whether it was slave labor, coerced forms of labor, or it was sharecropping, who were working in a relationship with the landowner. It still was a discriminatory economic proposition that forced those who entered into it to live by rules that they didn't set. And anytime people are forced to live by rules they don't set, when the rules are being changed to bring about a normalization of the relationship, it means that somebody has agreed to bring about an end of the racist state to kind of work toward a kind of calm and peace with one another. Somebody has to reconcile that. And what we have failed to do in American history, and what we failed to do in the Western world, we have not reconciled any of the pain of the past. And so whenever somebody's called a racist, they can see their grandfather being one, but even their grandfather being one is going to be a qualified racist. He's not going to be a racist because my grandfather had a black friend, is one of the first things people say. But racism, as we understand it, is not who your friend is. It is the structures you embrace to empower you as a so-called racial categorization over others.
Yeah.
Who operate one that is different and distinct from you. So, with that said, with no reconciliation, no serious discussion of race. I always said in my class that 2 discussions you ain't gonna have in America that's comfortable. You ain't gonna have a discussion about sex, and you ain't gonna have one about race.
Yeah, yeah. So my question to you is this, Doc. We have today, I guess we have today an opportunity to reconcile, or to at least broach the topic of the past injustices that have been done. But yet, you know, I see a lot of those empowering, and we have a president right now who's running a campaign. It's strictly racist. I mean, this is back to George Wallace campaign.
No, it's actually back. It's actually back to Woodrow Wilson more than Wallace. He's some of his policies are quite draconian, and that they represent more Jacksonian America and ideals. But in terms of racist policy, the only thing he has not been able to do is introduce as policy or as law discriminatory laws. What he has done is use the offices that he controls as president to spur on kind of discriminatory decision making. And since the court gave them an out by saying that if discrimination occurs with no intent, then if you cannot show that intent was part of the character, it is not true discrimination. Well, you ain't been discriminated against. The court has not been affected by that, you see. The other part of that is Donald Trump is a racial strategist. And he is playing a card Wallace dealt and others did. But the more he feels like he is down in the numbers or the so-called polls, which you say don't matter, the more virulent he becomes in his attack on somebody that is not part of his group.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he finds people of color or ethnicity that joins him, they become his people. Like, this is my African American, or this is my Mexican Americans who support Trump. This is my Cubans, or this is my Spanish people who support Trump. And they are elevated to a status above everybody else who doesn't. And so in this president's mind, it appears that he believes he is only to provide goods and services as a president to those who voted for him. Everybody else, so what? You didn't vote for me. Because he keeps making the statement that cities run by Democrats and people don't vote for me. Why am I paying attention to them? They don't like me anyway.
Yeah.
So here's the thing I need to add here. In racist mindset, there seems to be a bit of instability. There seems to be a kind of tenderness of spirit where people are offended by the most minuscule things. Your grandfather didn't lynch nobody, but he was at the lynching cheering it on.
Yeah.
What does that make your grandfather?
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah. This I want to carry on.
And the reason I made that point is I know people who've been to prison and they come home, they get a job, they pay their dues to society. But in the minds of these same people who are trying to defend their grandfather, they cannot see why an aggrieved population such as African Americans who are sent to prison with impunity would have relationships with people who've been to prison. We don't have much choice.
Mm.
We don't have much choice.
Well, I want to go off of what you just said about the grandfather lynching. I had this one guy, white guy, who told me that, well, hey, look, I didn't enslave anybody. I had nothing to do with what happened 400 years ago. But that's not the point, Doc. The point.
Okay,
the point
so
is
the question that you should have brought back to him is, then you may not have had anything to do with that, but you embrace the policies that will give you a leg up over me, even if those policies are discriminatory against me. You benefited from the policies by virtue of whiteness, and you don't see anything wrong with that.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to get to him. Even though he may not have been there, he is benefiting. He is benefiting from years and years of discriminatory practices.
But see, here's where I think people miss this out. People don't have long memories when it comes to history. They only have long memories when it comes to their pain. They don't have long memories when it comes to your hurt or your pain or anything that's going to make them culpable of responsibility in antiquity. They don't have those same feelings, Roger. So like I told you, why you keep trying to talk to people that ain't listening? So here's what I suggest. Anybody who's trying to talk to a friend, say what you need to say and cast it onto the winds and the sea of forgetfulness. And if it works, you'll see. If it doesn't, then you keep moving. You see, because we keep trying to save people who want to get baptized but don't want to get wet.
Right.
There's something wrong with that picture, bro. You got to get dunked. The way race operates now in American society, it is sneaky and subtle. It is sneaky and subtle. For example, I saw a young man sentenced in court. Young man had that nervousness. You could see him. He was trembling almost. And when the judge said something to him, he seemed to smile. I know as a black man who's been around young black folks all his life, that's a nervous tendency that young black men and young black people have in the face of white power. They kind of smile or snicker because they're scared and they're trying to neutralize that fear. Well, the judge took that as an affront and threw out a 2-year sentence and gave the boy 7 years because he thought the boy was being disrespectful to the court. not paying attention to the fact that this was a kind of cultural quirk of the man. And the young lady who was part of the DA's thing was quite upset about it. And he said he didn't want to hear this foolishness. They come in here and they don't have no respect for the court. What he meant was he didn't have respect for his authority. You see, there's a difference to have respect for an institution and to have respect for the present person who occupies the space. See, the institution ain't making those decisions. It's the people who's making those decisions, right? And that is a concern for me, is that the same young man, if white, would have gotten probation. He would have got a good talking to by the judge. But this young man was not redeemable in this judge's mind. And that's where that implicit bias comes in. That bias comes in that seems to rest in the minds of people who have had in their history this idea of inferiority and this idea of this cultural separateness. But I'll be honest with you, man, what I've learned, man, you guys have been in the military, y'all know this. When you spend time with folks and you sit down and relax and talk, and you realize it ain't but $25 and all y'all gonna get some of it, and you share a meal or two together, things start to get simpler. But they are not simple in a world where there's $100 on the table, $1,000 on the table, because that 25 meant that we all gonna get a little bit. But the bigger the pot gets, the more torturous the logic gets with those who are trying to obtain more. They're seeing you as a threat then. You know, I like my military friends. Well, you know, we all green, but there's some darker shades of green, bro. There's some darker shades of green. Why, you know, like now they're raising concerns as to why blacks are not being promoted to a certain level in the military.
Yeah.
Just for example, blacks have been in the military 30 years. Don't ever make colonel. They make lieutenant colonel on their way out the door. You know? And that's a real serious issue. And why does it occur? Because there is a hierarchy that begins to get smaller and tighter and excludes more and more people because the dollar got bigger. The lines of authority led up to one person, and that one person made it clear he was more comfortable with looking at himself in the mirror and not those who did not look like him. This to me is an oversimplification of implicit bias. You don't intend to do it, you just do it.
So I want to go back to this sentencing that you just talked about.
Sure.
You know, I've discussed with you. We had this case here in Lawrence where this black dude got 12 years for kissing a white girl.
Oh yeah,
and,
I saw that case.
Yeah, Albert Wilson, and you know you had the Stanford swimmer who actually raped, sexually assaulted a woman, and he got probation. So
yeah.
You know, isn't that what we have to go through? Isn't that discrimination? Isn't that?
Well, here's where power, the use of power, and the absence of power come into hand. When whites have power, they wield it with a force that reinforces their biases. That young man was sent a message: leave white girls alone. The young man and the swim team was sent a message: you crossed the line, son, but you can redeem yourself. You see? Now, the case of the young man in court, the judge didn't want any of that psychobabble. He didn't want to hear from the psychologist or anybody else about that young man. He wanted that young man to stand there, be contrite, drop his eyes to the floor, and say, yes, sir, boss, essentially. And this is where sentencing guidelines should not be as flexible. This was a first offense. It was a minor crime, you see, and this young man's going to jail for something he shouldn't have went to jail for that long over. The boy in Kansas, I would love to see the economics of that trial. How wealthy were the parents? Number one. What was the relationship between him and the girl? Number two, had there been a warning?
No, there
to the
wasn't.
young
This,
man?
this was just one of those things.
One of those random
happenstance.
things.
Yeah.
And if it was one of those and since it was one of those random things, then it tells you a whole lot about irresponsibility on the part of those who make decisions about white folk. A young white girl who drinks too much, she's just trying things out. But a young black man is grown. Remember, black kids who do playful things. Remember the kissing case in Carolina and Robert F. Williams? Negroes with Guns,
Yeah.
and Tim Tyson's book, Radio Free Dixie, where the little boys and little white girls were playing, and they got the bleach and poured it in the girl's mouth, made them do that, and they locked these little boys up in the jail and whipped them with belts and scared them with Klan uniforms. And these little boys, 6, 7 years old. And they called it the kissing case. And what that case showed blacks in Monroeville, North Carolina, was their utter legal powerlessness. That they, without the vote, they had absolutely no power. They had absolutely no power. And that the racist system that existed had all the power. And the women in the town were really concerned because event after event spiraled until it hit a head and Robert had to leave. And I suggest to people, read the book Radio Free Dixie by Tim Tyson and The Blood of Emmett Till, and you'll get a sense of the hopelessness people from that generation forward felt about the American justice system and about the idea of how bias works against black folk. Okay?
Well, I appreciate that, Doc, man. And now that we've tackled that, so how do we? And the final question I want to broach with you, and before I'll give Mark and Anthony some questions for you. How do we broach this whiteness?
Same way.
We have to deal with this whiteness. You know, white folks don't have to deal with the whiteness. You know, as you know, Du Bois talked about the Negro problem and the double consciousness. You know, being an American and being a Negro. You know, I personally believe that the problem that we have in this country over race and racism is not blacks. I think it's a white problem. So how do we deal with this whiteness, and how do we get them to understand that it's up to them if we want to change this thing?
Well, see, I think part of the narrative to change this thing was that in this new light, this George Floyd era, we opened the door to dual responsibility, but it was articulated to whites that y'all got to fix this because y'all messed this up. You're talking to a people who avert responsibility in serious matters that have no economic consequences or benefits to them. And so now you're telling them they're responsible for the broken racial system in the country, which they blamed ungrateful blacks for. You see, America, unlike other countries who've had big racial issues, never had a conversation about this, never had an open dialogue or discussion. And so, Roger, my concern is that we can never give to whites the complete responsibility to fix what we see as a racial problem. We got to keep riding this horse. And we've got to keep pushing people to come to the table and sit and gradually gain small victories, much like Charlie Houston and others did when they fought in the NAACP to end Jim Crow. We have to have more moral victories. What do moral victories do? Not a damn thing, but make you know that there's something happening to help you take another step higher. Roger, I don't think it's solely white folks' responsibility to fix the racial problem. I think it's ours to hold their feet to the fire to address the racial problems in the spirit of what they call a Christian nation. So I figured there should be an ecumenical discussion that no matter what religion you are, you need to use the testaments of your faith to sit down and say, hey, look, what can we do to fix this? Okay, see.
All right, Doc, I'm gonna open up. I'm gonna open it up to two guests here.
Okay. How you brothers doing, man?
Good. That's Martinez. I'm Anthony Beverly from a long time ago, John Jay High School. And I'm sorry about my delay, but car problems has cost me 4 trips now to San Marcos. But I'm here now.
Oh wow.
Yeah, tell me about it. I'm at my mechanic's shop right now.
Yeah.
But when me and Roger talked many times, but in a sense, if it's a white person problem, and they're basically, Chris Rock said something like, he said Shaquille O'Neal is rich, the person writing the check is wealthy, so they're gonna always offer us crumbs. That's like a given that we're gonna get pieces, but for us to be a part of the conversation on a normal basis, that's probably more of my issue. Yeah, we get invited to parties, but at the end of the party, we need to leave. But we're not really a part of it. We're just like a visitor. So I wonder, how can we be a part? And maybe it's us doing our own thing potentially. But so how can we really feel like we have really been a part of things? That's
well, you know, my belief is this: is that we need to throw more parties.
For us or for them or for both?
We need it for both. We need to have more parties because I find that you break down barriers through socialization more than you do confrontation.
Right, 100%.
I really feel that. I really, and what starts to happen in those moments of socialization, they are too infrequent, number one. Number two, I just don't think white people understand how much pressure Blacks confront in dealing with the day in and day out relationship with whites at work and the decisions they make as in relationship to our lives. Because many people, you've been working 30 years, you feel as though you are never comfortable, that you're always a half a step away from the door. You know?
Right.
You know, and one of the things I've always understood until you are in the position of making decisions to influence policy, you don't have very much authority. And what I'm suggesting is that through social relationships, we can begin to break down barriers that will lead toward more affirming interactions with one another. Now, I ain't talking about going kissing each other in the mouth. I ain't talking about baptizing folks and being their godchildren all the time. What I am talking about is breaking bread together, sitting down, just having a basic conversation. But when it comes to policy, you cannot make a policy regarding Mexican Americans and ain't no Mexican Americans in the room.
Right.
You can't make a policy regarding Black folks and ain't no Black folks in the room. And we must somehow demand to someone who will listen that these policies are null and void.
Doc, can I interject something right there?
Yeah, you can.
Is that for me, and is that the Blacks that we end up having that sit at the table for us, you know, just like they had, you know, Trump had those Black preachers that came up, you know, and they talked all that BS about how they think he's the best president for the country and all of that kind of thing. That's what kind of
See, may I stop you there? I didn't
Sure.
count them brothers and sisters, and nobody else did. The concern I have is only people like Donald Trump count them.
Right. But
And so, but you
it
got to
hurts the
look at
whole.
this. You got to look at this Trump thing as an outlier to reality. This is not reality we dealing with. We dealing with a person who is running a game on everybody, and we just at the bottom of the totem pole in this game. He's screwing everybody, man. Everything he does, he's counting the benefit to him.
But like you said, 60% of those white America.
No, that number is not.
Because we are their enemy. They saw
that number is artificially high. Number one, and now here's what I'm finding. They said this morning that 50-something percent, 52, 50, 53% of whites in America believe that the racial issues in the country should be addressed. That's a higher number than started back here before George Floyd got killed. 70% of them say that there should be some reform of police. So here's what Trump's trying to do. He's not trying to convince the police to act better. He's convincing white people to view us with suspicion and embrace the police as the guardians of the democracy they hold so dear.
Right.
That's that old strategy, man, that goes back to the Houston Police Department. And I interviewed quite a few of them brothers, man, and they said, we serve the elites. Problem with police in American society is that they don't see themselves as part of the society they serve. And when you work with somebody, man, and you know how this is, they don't see themselves as part of the reality they in. I don't care where you work. There's one or two of them like that. They come to work every day, they do their job, and they snitch on everybody else. Because they are strategically thinking they're gonna join that rank of the master, the guy, and you see, so that those group brothers and sisters at that table for Trump, that's how I saw them. I saw them as hustlers trying to hustle a hustler.
Yeah. Right.
And and matter of fact, he needed that affirmation. I ain't never seen no president of the United States who that weak, man, in terms of he has to be affirmed by everybody. People like me. These people like me. Man, they don't like you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you like my grandma say, don't give a damn about nobody liking you. They got to respect you, baby.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what you raise is a valid point. We must begin to determine who sits at the table. And we must make sure that they represent at least some of the core values that we represent. And here's what I think now. I think there has to be a conversation about what we want now. What can we attain? Number one, I think the most important thing coming up when Biden and them take office, other than undo all those executive orders Trump did, is raise the minimum wage in this country to where working class people are making anywhere from $12.50 to $15 an hour. And I think it's important. And the reason why that is, countries that show that people make anywhere from $12.50 to $15 an hour, that the rate of prison people going to prison is lower.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the rate of divorce is even lower. And you know, my brother, before he kind of had a nervous breakdown after my mom died, my younger brother, he was always kind of frail. My brother worked at the hospital, not the hospital, but the Hilton Hotel and several other hotels for over 25 years of his life. And he said when my daughter got a job at the little factory up here, he said, "Ooh, Kayla making good money." She was working in the summer. She was making $10.25. He said, "I never made $10.25 an hour." Here's a man who worked 20 years or 25 years of his life. Never made $10 an hour. Now there are reasons why his pay was lower, why he didn't progress up the table. He was a little slower than normal, and people operate in the work world try to take advantage of him. But there should be something in place where a worker like my brother was the top worker at the hotel, should have been in the top echelon of pay. But the system does not work that way. So people are saying, why you want to raise people $15 an hour? That's gonna hurt. No, it's not gonna hurt small business. What it's gonna hurt is the recreational spending of small business owners. Because, you know, I've been watching these TV shows since we've been in the house for all this long. And one of the things I've noticed, white people buy a lot of frivolous stuff. Boats, RVs, vacation homes that are more than our basic home. And I asked myself, what's the difference? This dude and his wife are making $75,000 a month, but they can afford a $400,000 vacation home. What did we do wrong? And what I found is that there is a cultural bias against us acquiring the accoutrements of positions that we've earned in life that don't exist for whites when they walk into the room. How you doing, young man? And so it is important for us as folks to, number one, really pay attention to who they pick as voices in the room. Number two, ask these people who are going to speak for you or asking you to support them, what do they stand for? Where are they on the spectrum? Where are they on the spectrum of equal wages? Where are they on the stages of adequate health care, lower medical costs, things that affect us as men? Or, for example, the one is, where are they on the spectrum of affordable housing or financing options for minority people? If the military hadn't done the GI Bill, housing for African Americans, I argue, would be 15 to 20% lower than it is. My dad got a house after World War II. He bought it. He was a master builder and carpenter, and so he bought another one. Then so he ended up with 2-3 houses, but he bought older houses and rebuilt them. I say that to say, my dad reflected something in my community that at that time in the 1960s, less than 20% of Black folks own their own house. And we still at this place, man, where people are trying to get their own house. And you know, let's finish this conversation at another time. Next month is good.
I was going to tell you that we have to.
Next month is good for me.
Yeah.
I got some time next month. I got to have a little back surgery thing, but so I'll be down a little bit so I can talk. So if you guys want to talk or catch me next week when I'm talking at the University of Houston on the 24th. Roger has the link, and I'm going to be talking about policing in Houston and a little tighter conversation. Not that it's kind of rambling. It was great talking to you guys. And Roger, as usual, man, you know, change is messy, man.
Yeah. All right, y'all.
Roger.
I want to thank you all for participating. Again, Doc's on the 24th of
Mark,
September.
I'm on. Send me a note.
All right. We will see y'all later.
All right, brother. Take care.
All right.